Question 15 part A is to do with our indice rules. So we've got a negative indice, which means we find the reciprocal of our number. In other words, we flip it upside down. Then we've got a 2 at the bottom of our fraction, so if I write our fractional power here, we know that the number on the bottom means what root we find, so we're finding the square root here, and the number at the top is what power we raise it to, so we're looking for a power of 3. So the first thing I'm going to do with my 400 is I'm going to flip it upside down. So that gives me 1 over 400, but it's still to the power of 3 over 2. The next thing I'm going to do, because it's going to make it easier to do this part first, is find the square root of it before I cube it. Now I know that the square root of 400, well, the square root of 4 is 2, so the square root of 400, let's think 20 times 20, 20 times 20, 2 times 2 is 4, and we'll add the 2 zeros, so yes, it's 20. So 1 over 20 cubed is our answer. Now, we've got to cube that number, so 20 cubed, we know that 20 squared would give us 400. If we times that by another 20, then 2 times 4 is 8, and if we add the 3 zeros on, we end up with 1 over 8,000. Now, part B, we've got to express 0.652 as a fraction. Now, the dots on top of the 52 suggest that the 52 is the recurring part, so it's 0.652, 52, 52, and so on. So the first thing we're going to do is make x equal 0.652. So we always choose x to be equal to our decimal with the recurring part. Now what we want to try to do is to make, after our decimal point, the numbers which are recurring so that we can subtract them from each other to get rid of that recurring part. So the first thing I'm going to do is times both sides by 10. And if I do that, the 6 moves forward, and so I'm just left with the 52 recurring after the decimal point. But the decimal above and the decimal below aren't equal after the decimal point, so that's no good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to times it by another 10. So that gives me 100x, and now I've got 65.25 recurring after everything has moved forward. Again, that is no good because the 52 recurring is not the same as 25 recurring, so if I subtracted, I'd still have a recurring messy decimal after the decimal point. So I'm going to times it by 10 one more time, and this time the 2 comes forward, and I'm left with 52 recurring after my decimal point. So what I've got is two answers where what is after the decimal point is the same. So what I'm going to do with those numbers now is I'm going to subtract them from each other. So I've got 1000x, I've got a 0, 1000x equals 652.52 recurring, and I've also got that 10x equaled 6.52 recurring. So if I subtract those two from each other, 1000x take away 10x is 990x, and 652 take away 652.52 recurring, take away 6.52 recurring, well, the recurring part will cancel, so I've just got 652 take away 6, which is 646. And so to find my value for x, that is just going to be the 646 over my 990. And that is your 2 marks. Now the last part has asked me to simplify 3 minus 5 root 2 squared and state whether our answer is rational or irrational. So we know that with surd questions, if we're left with a surd in our answer, then our answer is going to be irrational. If it's not, then we're going to end up with a rational number. So the first thing we're going to do, because it's squared, it means we're going to have to times that bracket by itself. So I'm just going to write it and open it out so that we can see the two brackets. Now I'm going to multiply it like I'd usually multiply my brackets. I could use a few methods, but I'm going to use my foils. So my firsts I'm going to look at first, so that's my 3 times my 3, so that gives me 9. My outers, so that's my that's my 3 times my minus 5 root 2, so that's minus 15 root 2. Then I've got my minus 5 root 2, which is my inner, times the 3 which is on the inner, so that's another minus 15 root 2. And then I've got my minus 5 root 2 times my minus 5 root 2. Now I know the minus times a minus will give me a plus. My 5 times 5 will give me 25. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to write my root 2 and my root 2 next door to each other. Now as I'm going through my answer, I've got 9. I've got minus the 15. Minus a 15 is minus 30 root 2. And then at the end, where I've got my 25, I've got root 2 times root 2. Now we know that a root 2 times root 2 from our surds rules is the same as root 4, as we can do the 2 times the 2. Now root 4 we know is just 2, so we know at the end that we're going to have 25 times 2. And remember that you can do the little shortcut with your square roots, that if you've got a square root times a square root, and if it's the same number, then that just cancels to give you the number. So we've got 9 minus 30 root 2 plus 25 times 2, which is 50. So that means we've got 59 minus 30 root 2, and because that has the root 2 part in our answer, then we know that that is therefore irrational.